someone's installed. He said, "Can you tell a bookcase full," which I do, on Bible study books. And I said, "Great."
See, you just do what I do. When you have a full entire bookcase full of Bible study books, just write your own. And then you can have more books and more Bible study books. We are live, ladies and gents. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everybody who's joining us online. Thank you very much for, I want to hear a round of applause, our final session of Understanding Evil from a Christian Perspective. So anyway, thank you very much, everybody. And like I said, if you're here online, we want you to feel as much as possible like you're part of the class here this evening. With one exception, we have food. So thank you for everybody who brought food. I cannot transport food through the internet. So if you want to, while I'm rambling here at the beginning, to go to your kitchen, get some food of your own, have it there so you can feel like you're right here with us, that'd be great. But in the meantime, what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be going over chapter 7, the last chapter, which I've renamed, you'll notice, for the slide from what was in the book. That's because I realized it was nagging at me. You know, in the book, I called the chapter Getting from the Content to the Conversation. And it was one of those things where I started thinking about it. I said, that sounds really good. That sounds really good. Yeah, it sounded a little bit too good because I realized, like, yeah, that sounded really good when Greg Kokel made it up. Okay. And so it's like, yeah, I shouldn't be naming my chapter the same thing. And not that it's that unique of a thing, but he uses that phrase to refer to this exact same thing that we're talking about tonight. So I just changed it to Getting from the page to the person. See what I did there? So same basic concept. So, and again, if you're watching us online, we do want you to feel like you're part of the class. So I am monitoring here. We are currently broadcasting live on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel and the Trinity Joppa Facebook page. If you have a question, comment, answer to something we're talking about, again, bear with us because there's a little delay. You're about 30 seconds behind us here in the classroom. But I do have both of them sitting here on my screen. And so as soon as there's a break in the conversation, I'll be looking over here and we'll read your comments. We'll answer your questions so you can participate right along with us. There is tonight here in the building also the middle school concert, winter Christmas concert is going on right now over in the sanctuary. That is also being live streamed. So if you meant to be watching the Christmas concert and you accidentally clicked on this video instead, go back to the homepage, click on the concert and you'll get that one. Or else I could just sing some songs. I mean, if that could work, sing some Christmas carols. So, no, it's okay. We don't want to do that. We all know what my voice sounds like usually by the end of class, so we certainly don't want me singing. So anyway, but you'll know when the concert's over because, you know, everybody will leaving. When you see all these lights and everybody walking past the window, maybe somebody will stare here looking at me like, I don't know, somebody did one time before class, Bill, to try to scare me. We'll see what happens. So anyway, we're going to dive in about what tonight's class is all about. So here's the concept and why, you know, we had that marathon week a few weeks ago where we did 2 chapters because I really wanted to make sure we got to this. Because everything we've done so far, I don't want to say it's pointless, but it's less pointful without this class. And the reason is you can read a book, right? And you can read all these chapters and you can take in all this information. And if all you're looking for is kind of personal edification, you want to satisfy your own hunger, your own questions, things like that, then that's great. And that can serve that purpose and it can do that for you. But if you then want to take that information that you've learned and figure out how to use it in the real world, how to explain it to someone else, how to convey it to someone else, then you need to have some practice and a game plan about how you're going to go about doing that. And so what I wanted to do for this last class, it's kind of, in a sense, a summary, a wrap-up of everything that we've done. We're not learning anything new, per se, tonight as far as the material, but instead what we're doing is we're going to take everything we've learned these last 5 weeks, and we're going to look at some real-life comments. I didn't make any of this up. Everything you're going to see tonight, I went and I pulled off the internet somewhere, all right? It could be something that someone said in a speech. We're going to see an internet meme because everybody loves to share memes on social media, right? We're going to see one of those. We're going to see, you know, some things that were, and a blogger, you know, an atheist blogger, what they wrote. Because these are the types of things in today's day and age that are influencing people. All right. These are the types of things that influence the way people think. It would be great if people today were forming their opinions by properly researching things and weighing the evidence on both sides and arriving at what logically appears to be the best conclusion. Newsflash, they're not. All right? That's not how opinions are made. How opinions get made is someone reads something on the internet, or they see a meme that they laugh at, or they hear something said by someone that they look up to, someone that they want to be right, all right? And so they just automatically internalize it and they think it's true, all right? And so these types of things that we'll be talking about, well, if you're standing in a room and somebody's giving a speech and you hear them say this, you're not standing up and going up and grabbing the microphone from them and saying, let me tell you why you're wrong. But what might happen is you could have someone who's heard that speech, who then, or seen that meme or whatever it may be, who brings it up to you, all right? It comes up in conversation. So the question is, okay, how do you respond if someone makes one of these types of statements to you, all right? And I gotta be honest, lots of times people don't know where they get the stuff from. All right, they, like we'll talk about, well, there's this particular speech that this guy made. They might not even know who made it. They're just gonna say whatever, they're gonna repeat whatever they heard him say. So the point today is to practice. Now, how's that gonna work? All right, I'm going to present you with six different statements, all right? And then what we're gonna do, we're gonna read the statement, and then I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to put some questions up here on the screen. They're the same ones that are in the book if you want to follow along with the book. The point to this is, now in the book, if you've read parts of it, you'll see the format is I present it, I give questions, and then I give you my thoughts afterwards. Now, even when you're reading the book, if you did read the book, I hope you did it what the book suggested, which is you read the statement, and then you try on your own to think about and ponder those questions before you read the thoughts that I put in there. Because that's how you get the practice, is what you want to do is you want to look at these things and try to recognize what the significant issues are that we've learned about, all right? And these questions are kind of designed to help point you and kind of serve as a reminder to point you in that direction, all right? The important thing to realize is that, and I think I say this at the end of the chapter, but I'm going to say it again now at the very beginning. It's not up to you to convince anyone, all right? A lot of people get very hesitant and they figure, I just took this one class with Ken. I don't remember, maybe I'm lucky, I remember 10% of what he taught, okay? So I'm not equipped to go out there and answer these questions. And so what happens as a result? Well, you don't go out there and answer these questions. And guess what? If you don't go out there and answer the questions, you're never gonna get better at going out there and answering the questions, all right? Remember what we talked about, I think it was last week? I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. I don't know if it was last week or one of the weeks. If you don't know, say, I don't know. And then I'll get back to you on that. And then you go, you research it, and you actually get back to the person. That's fine. This type of thing is going to take practice. Being able to see what the flaws are in people's reasoning is going to take practice. But you have the Holy Spirit on your side, as we'll talk about a little bit later in this class. So don't be afraid to get out and do it. Somebody can't not believe any more than they already not believe, okay? So you're not gonna make matters worse. Just go out there and talk to people, all right? So that's what the point of this class is tonight. So let's go ahead and get on with our first statement. All right. Actually, no, we're not, because I forgot this quote first. All right. I forgot I had this slide in there. This is a quote from the aforementioned Greg Kokel. All right, to illustrate the point I was making. He's the one that came up with that content to conversation line. And he's trying to describe the importance of this two-faceted approach. You have all this knowledge. You have the information that was on the page, or as he calls it, the content. All right, and what you need, even though this is all swirling around in your head, you need a way to translate, get the stuff out of your head and build a bridge over to the conversation. Maybe I could get it from your head to your mouth and out your mouth, right? And he uses this illustration. He says, a sharp lawyer, no, I like this quote, yeah. A sharp lawyer needs more than facts to make his case in court. He needs to know how to use his knowledge well. In the same way, we need a plan to artfully manage the details of dialogues we have with others, all right? And this is from his book, Tactics. If you haven't read it, read it. all right? It is an excellent book. The entire book is not based on any knowledge. In other words, the point of the book Tactics by Greg Koukl is not to do like what we've been doing these last 5 weeks, all right? The entire book is a how-to guide. It's how to go out and have conversations, all right? And so it's a great book. I've taught a class on it here once before. I probably will again. But don't be afraid to get out. All right. And this is what we talked about before. This is from Luke chapter 12, verses 11 through 12. Look what Luke says. When you are brought before the synagogues, rulers, and authorities, do not worry about how you will defend yourselves or what you will say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you at that time what you should say. You have the Spirit on your side, all right? So understand, when you go out and talk to people, am I telling you it's not going to be stressful? Am I telling you there won't be conversations that will be uncomfortable? No, I'm not telling you that. What I am telling you is that when you do that, you're not alone, all right? The Holy Spirit's going to be right there alongside of you. All right. Now, let's look at our first statement. So now we are on page 87 in the book. Example number 1, this comes from a gentleman. He's an atheist blogger. His name is Daniel Florian. All right. Daniel Florian is what he's referring to here is, some of you may remember this, July 20th, 2012. There was a shooter who opened fire in a crowded movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. It was at the premiere of, was it The Dark Knight? It was one of the Batman movies. I think it was The Dark Knight, right? The one with Heath Ledger, right? And he killed 12 people. He injured 70 more. It was a major shooting because everybody was it was literally like shooting fish in a barrel. They were stuck in the movie theater. And so this is a blog, or from a blog, that Mr. Florian wrote after that event, all right? And so here we have a concrete example of evil happening in the world, and this was his response. He said, consider this. If I, meaning I, Mr. Florian, if I had the power to save everyone at the theater because I was all-powerful and all-knowing and all-loving and all whatever, and I didn't do it, wouldn't I be evil, or at least greatly negligent? With great power comes great responsibility. Good quote with a new Spider-Man movie coming out next month, by the way. Nobody gets that, do you? Okay. That's what Uncle Ben said to Spider-Man, to Peter Parker. Sorry. Their God does not seem up for the task. All right. So what I'm going to suggest you do is I'm going to bring up on the screen the questions we want to think about here. All right. If you want to keep that quote, if you have the book with you, you want to keep the quote in front of you on page 87 there. You can look at the quote while we're talking about the questions. All right, let's ponder that quote. The first question I asked to kind of get you in thinking in the right direction. How does Florian describe how he would be viewed if he did not act? What's he call it? Negligent. Before negligent, what else he say?
Evil.
Evil, all right? Does that description come with any assumptions that he's overlooking? What? How can you be good and evil if there's no God, right? Remember, that's the moral argument for the existence of God we talked about. He's assuming that there is this objective standard of morality above us, all right? But as we already talked about, you can't have that unless you have something above us, can you? On his view, on atheist view, all there is this level. All there is personal opinion or maybe cultural opinion. There's no transcendent view, all right? He certainly does seem to be appealing to a transcendent view. He doesn't say, for example, wouldn't people think I'm evil? He doesn't say, wouldn't people disagree with what I did? He says, wouldn't I be evil? Well, on atheism, the answer is no, because there can't be any such thing as good or evil. So you see, notice that recurring theme there. Right off the bat, he makes an assumption there. All right. I'm trying to make sure I'm keeping an eye here on the various different live streams in case anybody has any questions. Number 2, and here's where it's going to get a little tougher. All right, are there any relevant differences between Florian and God that might shed light onto why we should not evaluate God in the same way we would evaluate humans when it comes to their response to evil and suffering? And what I'm referring to here is his whole quote is talking about how would he be evil? So he's taking this example of, look at me as a human being, and here is what the standard should be for me, a human being, if I were confronted with this situation. Well, is there anything we talked about in this class that shows that a difference, a fundamental difference between human beings and God, such that maybe that's not a fair comparison.
God is God and we are not.
God is God and we are not. That's the simple way of putting it, yeah.
Florian doesn't have all the information.
God knows everything. Florian does not have all the information. Exactly. Remember, we talked about how it's impossible. So many of these arguments try to say, well, it doesn't appear to me that God has any good reason. Well, great. It doesn't appear to you, but would you expect it to appear to you? Remember the whole example we gave about the hippopotamus in the park, right? You go to a dog park and you say, there do not appear to be any hippopotami in this park. Is that a reasonable statement to make? Yes. Why? Because if there was a hippopotamus in the park, you'd expect to be able to see it, wouldn't you? All right. Now I go into that same park and I say, I'm in this park and there do not appear to be anybody blowing any dog whistles in this park. Or I don't hear any dog whistles in this park. Is that a reasonable statement to make? No. Because you wouldn't expect to be able to hear if there's a dog whistle in the park, right? Now, $1 million, anybody remember the acronym that we called that? That's something to do with the eye. But lid, no. Cornea, remember? Yeah. Just say it's corny, right? Condition of reasonable epistemic access. If you got that, I'd be really impressed. But yeah, remember, but that's what that all meant, is that we shouldn't act surprised when we don't see things that we wouldn't be expected to see. A finite person should never be expected to see all the same things that an infinite God could see. And so we can't make that comparison. We can't say, well, based on what I see, I would be expected to do X. Therefore, God should also be expected to do X. Well, no, because God isn't limited by what you see, right? So you see, he's also making that invalid assumption in comparison there. All right. Third question we have on here. Do any Theodicies apply to the tragedy that Florian is addressing? Remember what a Theodicy is? Free will, right? This is where we get into the free will theodicy, because this is, remember there were two categories of evil we talked about, moral evil and natural evil, and this is an example of moral evil, isn't it? Well, if it's an example of moral evil, then you have all the arguments we talked about around the free will theodicy. And we're going to talk more about that in a later example here too. It's like, do you really want a world where God intervenes and takes away free will? Well, of course, some people will say, well, he should just take away some free will, but not all. Put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that one. So, all right, start to see how it works. All right. I'm on the wrong page here. Come here. Patsy Duffy is watching us on Facebook. She says, thanks for doing this, Ken. Well, thank you for watching, Patsy. I appreciate you being here. All right. And Ann Parrish is watching us on YouTube. And I'm not, I think it was the type of saying Virginia Tech. Is that what you were referencing, Ms. Parrish? I think you were trying to reference the Virginia Tech shooting. Yeah, same kind of thing, right? So you can see the example I came up with here was from the Colorado shooting, but we just had at the time I wrote the book, we didn't have the one that just happened at the high school in Michigan, right? Same thing though. It's the exact same type of argument that's made and the exact same type of responses that we can make as Christians. All right. Now let's look at our next one. This is a sad one for me personally. Why? Because I really like Stephen Fry as an actor. He's funny. He's a really good actor. My wife is sitting here in the room, and I got to show you this picture. I don't remember the name. He was on a show. He was a regular on a show that we used to watch, and I can't remember which one. I'll have to show you him afterwards, or you can Google him. Google Stephen. Yeah.
Are you talking about Bones?
Was it Bones? Yeah, he was on Bones regularly, right? He played a psychiatrist on Bones, yes. Did he end up killing anybody? I can't remember. Virtually everybody ended up killing someone on that show. We ended up like him. He's a good actor. He's a really funny actor. He is an outspoken atheist, all right? And so in February of 2015, he gave an interview to a gentleman by the name of Gabe Byrne on Ireland's RTE television. And in the course of that interview, Byrne asked Stephen Fry a question. And he asked him what he would say to God after he dies if it turns out that Fry is wrong, that God does indeed exist. And what you see there on the screen is what Fry said, what his response was. He said, here's what he would say to God. How dare you create a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? It's not right. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain? All right. Yeah, there's a one-way ticket to hell, yeah.
He doesn't see the beauty in the world. That's the first thing that I think.
Sadly, he doesn't see the beauty in the world, yeah. I mean, he's really focusing on the negative. Let me ask you this before we get into the questions, before I change the slide up to the questions, all right? Just initial reactions. What do you see here? What's the first thing, and it can be different things for different people, what's the first thing that you would zero in on? You know, Barb, you mentioned he doesn't see the beauty in the world, which also, we didn't get into that, but there's an argument for God based upon that as well. Again, if there's no mind, if there's no person behind the universe, what does beauty even mean? That's still a quality of something. That's not just a bare description, all right? You know, you're not just describing something in terms of the particles that make it up. You're ascribing some additional quality that seems to require a mind behind it. So beauty itself could be seen as evidence for God. But what else do you see in there?
The thing that it's not our fault, like, but then there's the fall in the Garden of Eden. We forgot to mention that.
He didn't mention the fall in the Garden of Eden, which, you know, you could say that certainly there's an element that we talked about this earlier, didn't we? That arguably even with natural evil, there's at least some kind of element of human agency in that, because even that fall was the result of the fall of Adam and Eve, which we could talk about again tonight. Do you have something?
I see him as miserable and unhappy, and I wonder what happened in his life.
That's always a good question. He says she sees him as miserable, unhappy, and wonders what happened in his life. The funny thing is, he's a comedian, you know? But we see that, don't we? I mean, that's, quote, Robin Williams, right? It's a prime example. We do see that, a lot of misery in there.
He also, I think, is saying that God created all the stuff he's calling evil on purpose.
Saying that God created all the stuff he's calling evil on purpose. Well, what about, let's pick up on that for a second. All the stuff that he's calling what? What's he calling it?
Evil.
I'm sorry, didn't we already just do this with the last one? He's assuming a moral standard again, isn't he? An objective moral standard. And clearly it's objective here. He's not just talking about personal opinion, because he's trying to apply that standard to God, isn't he? He's not just saying, how dare you do things that I didn't personally prefer. He's saying, how dare you do things that are utterly evil. He's accusing God of being evil if God actually exists. He's assuming an objective standard again.
He's also saying that because God didn't create the world the way he thinks it should be, therefore God is mean-minded and stupid.
Because God didn't create the world the way he would have liked it to be, therefore God is mean-minded and stupid. Yeah, as Mary Kay so eloquently put, this definitely is a one-way ticket to hell, isn't it? I got to think that if God really does exist, this isn't what he would actually say to him, you know, because he'd be a little bit... He is given the free will to express his opinion. So the very fact, I mean, and that's also why we as Christians need to expect and to some extent respect this, all right? Because if we say we value free will, we need to value people's ability to disagree with us.
Okay, but there is a right way and a wrong way.
There's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And especially when you're expressing your opinion to God. And I think this would fall into the category of the wrong way. Quite obviously the wrong way. All right. Gene Brown says hello to everyone. Everybody say, hi, Gene.
I wonder what the interviewer said in response to Fry's statement.
You know, and I've seen the interview. I had to go back and watch it because I can't remember. I think he just kind of moved on, to be honest. I don't think he really commented on the response. Yeah, maybe, because it was a very abrupt statement. I mean, you can find it on YouTube if you want to look it up, and it's kind of jaw-dropping to hear him say it. All right, so we talked about this. Well, let's...
That's a common, that was a common question at the end of the Inside the Actor Studio. Do you remember?
Yeah, Inside the Actor Studio, which was, what was...
I know what you mean, but I can't remember his name.
Yeah, well, I can't remember. John Lipton. Yeah, who interviewed people, and it was one of the questions that we said at the end, yeah.
Based on somebody else, but it was, one of the things is what would you say, you know, if God exists, what would you say to him when you walk through the door?
And the fact that that was such a prominent question Inside the Actor Studio probably means Stephen Fry had been asked this before and had this answer prepared. This probably wasn't the first time he gave it. Yeah, he was very prepared. So take a look here. So let's look at the actual questions that I asked in the book and see what we hit on. How does Fry describe God for having created the world as it is? And we just talked about that. He says God would be what? Evil. Does that create problems for him? Yes, it does, okay? But we already touched on that. Same thing as the last one. You're going to see that recurring theme. Atheists do this all the time when they raise the problem of evil. And now you're starting to see why I put the chapters in the order that I did. Because you may, when we were doing that moral argument for the existence of God, you may have been wondering, Ken, what does this have to do with evil? And now you're starting to see, because all these arguments against evil, or about evil rather, all start from an assumption that evil exists, and that causes a problem for them right off the bat. All right, number two, and this is a little bit trickier. Does Fry seem to be referencing a particular theodicy? All right, does he seem to be aware of a particular theodicy here? And if so, which one? So take a look at what he says there. How dare you create a world in which there's such misery that is not our fault? What theodicy does he seem to be aware of that he's hinting at here? Free will, right, exactly. So he's basically saying there's evil out there that isn't the result of our free will, right? Okay, remember what we talked about when we were talking about theodicies? No theodicy is intended to answer every single situation of evil, isn't it? That's not the point. And we gave the example of a mother who's has willing to let their child risk certain pains throughout their life. But that doesn't mean that just because they're willing to let their child risk having pain throughout their life, that every single time they do that, it has to be for the exact same reason. When they're younger, it's because they want them to learn to ride a bike and they know they could fall. When they're older, it's because they want them to grow up to be a good adult, so they're going to trust them with more responsibility, knowing they're going to mess up sometimes, right? In both instances, you have a parent who's allowing the child to experience some pain, but for different reasons. It's the same thing here. Just because God allows certain elements of evil and pain and suffering in the world doesn't mean he has to have the exact same reason every time. He can have different reasons for different ones. So then the next question, of course, becomes, if he seems to be aware of the free will theodicy, is there another theodicy that might apply to his objection to what he's saying here? Is there another theodicy that, in other words, could apply to all that evil that isn't our fault? And do you remember what it's called? I'll give you a real easy hint. You want a quick look? There's a table of contents in your book. I can help you remember some of these things. People online might have an advantage on you here. If it takes you long enough to find it, they might get caught up on the 30 seconds they're behind, and they can answer.
We allow people for a good result.
Well, what's the result? Remember the theodicy we talked about? Was there something particular that God might... God is good all the time, and all the time God is good. What's that? Not the greater good theodicy. Remember we talked about some problems with the greater good theodicy. Remember we said that if with the greater good theodicy, what that says, the way it's generally articulated is God has, for every individual act of evil, that God will only allow that evil into the world if he can use it to bring about a greater good. And any individual act that he can't bring about a greater good from, those he'll stop. The problem with that, is articulated that way, is that means anytime you see something evil going on, you shouldn't interfere. Because that means if God allowed it to bring about a greater good. Oh, wait, but how do we know that our interfering isn't the greater good? I don't know. It's just mind-blowing, right? It creates all sorts of weird contradictions in our head. So we said even the greater good theodicy, you need to think of more generally, all right? God may have a general good he wants to bring about. As a result of that general good, like free will, for example, we talked about, as a result of wanting to bring about that general good, that means he has to allow evil generally. So he doesn't look at it on an individual act-by-act basis. He looks at it on a general principle basis. But no, there was another one we talked about. What was it?
Soul-making.
The soul-making, process of elimination, right? It's not free will. It's not greater good. It's the soul-making theodicy we talked about, right? At least some instances of evil, just like a parent might allow a child to have some pain into their life so they learn not to do something again, right? Same thing with God. There might be some things that we allow in our life that he allows in our life because it builds us up in some way. And remember the other we talked about is just because we can articulate certain theodicies doesn't mean we're always going to understand every reason God has for every single piece of evil that comes in the world. That's not the point. Because again, God is infinite, we are not. We're not going to see every reason. That's not the responsibility here. In order to answer these objections, we just have to show some plausible reasons. If somebody comes to you with a specific incident, why did God allow this particular thing to happen? The answer is always, I don't know, I'm not God. But I can talk on a general level and give you some general reasons why God might allow some evil instance in the world, but I'm not going to presume to be God and say this was definitely his answer or his reason for allowing this particular thing. All right? Yeah.
Would it be possible, in both of these examples, to then go a step further if you said the things that you said and say, but think about when these awful things happen, what happens in the aftermath? All the good.
That, what you're hitting on there, Barb, is kind of the essence of the soul-making theodicy. And for those of you that are online, what Barb is saying is it possible when these bad things happen, instead of just focusing just on the bad thing itself, to think about the aftermath and all of the good that comes out of it? I mean, and the answer to that is yes, okay? I mean, there are, again, we're not God, okay? So we can't claim to know for sure, but we can at least look at some of these things and say, okay, this bad stuff happened, but then look at all these things, this growth, this development that happened, whether it be as our whole society or whatever, as a result of that bad thing happening. Look at September 11th was a horrible event, right? And I'm not saying this is why God allowed it. I don't know why God allowed September 11th, all right? But one thing you have to admit, after September 11th, this country came together, all right? It's not that way anymore, but for a while, it came together. So that may have nothing to do with why God allowed September 11th, but that's something that you're getting at, is that you can't just look at the incident itself. You have to look at the big picture, and God, of course, has an infinitely bigger picture than any of the rest of us have, doesn't he? All right. So what else we got? Where are we at? Next question. 3. Fry challenges God's act of creation, where he actually says, how dare you create a world in which there is such misery? All right. Is it a fair criticism of God to say he created a world in which there is such misery that is not our fault? Did God create a world of misery? What did he create? Exactly. Genesis 1:31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. At the time of his creation, it was all good. All right. Evil came here as a result of the fall, or we should say after the fall. That's what led to evil coming into the world. The other thing, remember, we talked about back in week 1, when you say, if you try to say that God created evil, all right, and created this evil in the world, what do we say? What's the nature of evil? Is evil even a thing of its own that can be created? No, remember, evil we talked about as being a privation, being the absence of good, all right? I'm not going to get that whole conversation again. That was, week 2, I think. So that's a big philosophical discussion. Watch week 2 if you didn't catch it, all right? All right. Let us move on to our next one. Actually, our next 2 are both by a gentleman named Steven Weinberg. Steven Weinberg is a Nobel laureate in physics. He's Jewish. And he gave an address in April of 1999 it was a conference called the Conference on Cosmic Design by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. All right, and he is specifically speaking now of the Holocaust in World War II. All right, and here's what he says about the Holocaust. It says, "It seems a bit unfair to my relatives to be murdered in order to provide an opportunity for free will for Germans. But even putting that aside, how does free will account for cancer? Is it an opportunity of free will for tumors?" All right, again, just quick thoughts. What do you see there? Free will has nothing to do with what? The tumors. Free will has nothing to do with tumors. Yeah, it's kind of laughable, isn't it? But free will has nothing to do with tumors. Anything else anybody sees in there? Moral versus natural? Yes. Anger. You definitely see anger there, right? All right, let's take a look here. All right. The first thing, does Weinberg make any assumptions when he says it seems a bit unfair?
He judges what's fair.
Judges what's fair, which means he's assuming what? That there's a standard. He's again assuming there's an objective standard of right and wrong, of fair and unfair, that everybody has to abide by. All right. And again, we see it all three of these first examples. There's that hidden assumption smuggled in of objective morality that, as we talked about previously in week 3, only makes sense if God is in the picture. So this is what happens: is you borrow from a theistic worldview to try to defend your atheistic worldview. You can't do that. All right. You can't. If you're going to defend atheism, you have to defend it based upon things that can be true if atheism is true. You can't borrow things that can only be possible if your atheism is wrong and then try to say that they support your atheism. It doesn't work that way. All right. Second one, Weinberg asks, this is what Bill's getting at, how does free will account for cancer? Do Christians claim free will accounts for cancer? No. And you were saying that's what kind of evil? Cancer is natural evil, right? The free will theodicy was never intended to explain natural evil. Again, God can have different reasons for allowing different things. Free will applies to moral evil, the acts of moral agents, and what they take. That's where free will comes in. This is what's called a straw man argument. I mentioned this briefly in the book. It's a philosophical term. Think of it this way. What do you think would be easier to push over? Let's say that I'm standing here and I've got my feet planted and I weigh a lot, all right? Or next to me, there is a scarecrow made entirely out of straw, and you have to push one over. Which one are you going to choose? Not Bill. I know what he would choose. The scarecrow, right? Why? It's a whole lot easier, isn't it? But no matter how much you make up that scarecrow to look like me, it's not me. It's a scarecrow. It's a straw man. That's what a straw man fallacy is in logic. It's where you create something that's not the genuine article, claim to everybody it's the genuine article, because this is a lot easier to tear down than this is, all right? And so what he's impliedly saying here is, Christians all think that free will accounts for why God allows all evil. And because that's a pretty easy argument to tear. If that's what Christians really believed, that's a really easy thing to tear down, isn't it? And he does it. What, do tumors have free will? But that's not what Christians say. We never claimed that. All right? Free will only accounts for some possible reasons. And keep in mind, this whole thing, we're never saying this is definitely why God allows evil. We're never claiming that. We're saying these are possible, plausible reasons, not just mere possibilities, but these are, good likely reasons why God might do it. And if we can articulate good likely reasons why God might allow it, then you atheists haven't proven that there's any inconsistency between God existing and evil existing, because there are good plausible reasons why he might be allowing it. All right, do one more check in here. All right. Third question. Oh, this is a tough one. This is one that's hard to take a lot, all right? If God only removed free will from the unjust, which, let's lay this down, this should be one of those things like, yes, one of those obvious statements, the Nazis were unjust, okay? Very much so, all right? But if God, and so a lot of people will say, I don't want God to remove all free will. I just want him to remove free will from the bad guys.
So we're all sinners, so we're all.
That's the difficult line a lot of people don't recognize, because what we do, and we talked about this before, is a lot of people love to say, well, I'm not a Nazi, so I'm pretty good, right? Or I've never killed anybody, so I'm pretty good. And so whenever we evaluate whether we're good people or not, what do? We compare ourselves to the worst of the worst.
You gotta evaluate by thought, word, and deed.
By thought, word, and deed. Also, something a lot of people fail to do is to evaluate by thought, word, and deed. God doesn't just evaluate your thoughts, or your deeds, rather. He knows your thoughts. That's why Jesus recognized how thoughts can lead to down a path you don't want to go, have you ever said raka, that you've already, committed murder, things like that. So we always like to compare ourselves to someone that's going to make us look good. And it's kind of like stacking the deck beforehand. But when God's deciding whether you're good or not, he doesn't compare you to other fallen, sinful people. I mean, that's like saying which is the least dirty stone in the mud pit, I mean, they're all dirty, all right? God is looking at you from his perch, which is one of perfection. And compared to that, not only do we all not meet it, we all don't even come close to meeting it. And the problem people have, sometimes they don't realize that if God really did, from his perspective, intervene on the unjust, that means none of us would be having free
That
will.
also addresses the theory of degrees of sin.
Yeah. Well, and I think you can, I don't have a problem with people if you want to say there's degrees of sin in the sense that, if I kick you in the shin, it's not the same as if I cut your head off, okay? But so there can be degrees, but what we need to realize is, but from God's perspective, it's like you've got God's perfection, all of us, and all those degrees we're talking about are all down here at this level. It's not like somebody's really close to God and this one's not. No, it's all down here, all right? And so it's all to God. It's all still worthy of condemnation, right? So, all right. Find my mouse here. All right, let's move on to our next one. All right, this is still Stephen Weinberg. All right, still the exact same speech, actually, that he gave. And this is on page 94 of the book, if you want to follow along. And what he says here in the speech, later on in the speech, he says, with or without religion, good people can behave well, and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion. Yeah, that's, you chuckle, but that's when I've personally heard quite a bit. All right, let's take a look at some of these questions on it. All right. All right, the first thing he says, he talks about good people and bad people. I'm waiting for someone else to chime in before I do. There's the same thing, right? What makes one person good, another one bad? You're appealing to that moral standard again. Not a big surprise because we just saw him do it. Same guy, we just saw him do it in the last quote. All right, same mistake. Every single quote so far I've given you has made that exact same mistake. All right. Now, and I want to be fair. All right. We were doing all this, even though we spent a whole week on the moral argument for the existence of God. It's not, there certainly are atheists out there who think that I'm wrong on this, all right, who think that they can explain objective morality without resorting to God. Sam Harris is a prime example. He just wrote a whole book on it called The Moral Landscape, where he tried to claim that he could explain objective morality without resorting to God. But what he ends up doing is he basically just, when he boiled down, he kind of, again, assumes morality, and then from there builds morality. It's like, no. If you boil it down, because he bases it based on human flourishing and all this, like your starting assumption was a moral judgment to begin with, so you haven't proven anything. Remember, we talked about you have to be able to ground moral values and moral duties. Well, if you start out by assuming moral values and duties, you haven't grounded them. You just assumed them. All right, but that being said, so we didn't go through every possible moral theory that's out there. I know we talked about a few, but ultimately that just kind of gave you a representative sample to show some of the reasons why these alternative theories just don't hold up. So what you end up with, if you fairly evaluate it, is no, you can't have objective morality without God. And that kind of makes sense because, again, just think of that term transcendent, all right? Remember, transcendent is above us, other than us, all right? Quite literally, on naturalism, on materialism, atheism, that just says, they all say, there is nothing above us. That's the whole nature of their worldview. We are time plus matter and chance. Whatever you see, the physical stuff here that makes up this universe, that's all that's real. Nothing else is real. Of course, the laws of logic that they're using are not material items, but then we won't go into that. But that's what they say. They say that that's all there is. Well, if you say that's all there is, then you've left no room in your worldview for something that transcends all of that. And so you've kind of doomed yourself from the start. All right, so he does the same mistake. Number two, this is the one that I found very puzzling when I read this. Can somebody explain to me, please, what is a good person who does evil? Where do you draw that line? I'm very curious where Weinberg would draw the line between one person goes from being a good person who does evil to just an outright evil person who does good. It's an inevitable line drawing problem. And remember, we talked about this case of Adolf Eichmann. All right, when we talked about the banality of evil, Hannah Arendt came up with the theory of banality of evil, and the way she described Adolf Eichmann, she said, look, if you were to sit there and listen to him, he just seemed like anybody else. We were expecting some villain twirling his mustache, and that's not what we got. We got a guy that just thought he was doing his job, just like any of the rest of us. This is a guy who he wouldn't like murder his superior to try to get ahead in the world. That thought would never occur to him. That to him would be wrong. But somehow the mass extermination of the Jews was just like a baker baking the morning bread. It was just his duty to organize all this, you know? And so my question, I guess, for Weinberg would be, was Adolf Eichmann a good person that did evil? Because we can certainly see, based on the observations of Hannah Arendt of him, that he seemed in many ways to be just like any of the rest of us. He just like was this guy going about his normal routine. It just happened that his normal routine was to organize the mass extermination of Jews. All right? And so I wonder what he even means by that term, because it doesn't seem to make sense. It seems to be kind of a contradiction to begin with. And also, you know, from God's perspective, can there ever be such a thing as a good person who does evil? We're all fallen, right? Yeah. And the main thrust of his statement here seems to be, well, he flat out says it, right? For good people to do evil, that takes religion. Well, is it true that religion, by definition, always leads to evil? No. I mean, if you look at and I don't even think I have all this in the book, but you know where hospitals came from? The Christian church. You know, you look at, this is going to get me in trouble with some people, but there are now more crisis pregnancy centers trying to help mothers and who have newborn babies than there are abortion clinics in the United States. You know, where do you think all the food pantries, and most of the food pantries are run by? Churches. You know, and so it's one of these things where Richard Dawkins does the same thing. He tries to make it look like religion is just per se evil, and they just want to ignore all this counter evidence to the opposite. Now, is it true that religion, I'm not talking Christianity here specifically, but religion in general, can lead to evil?
Well, yeah, when you think of all the televangelists that have turned into real creeps.
The televangelists, certainly, who are, a lot of them taking advantage of people.
Supposed to be such a great guy, and he intimidated everybody.
Yep. The Bakers, Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. I'm thinking of a more extreme example that I've already referenced once in this class. Jihad, the extreme jihad, not, and I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. You have some Muslims that believe jihad is kind of like evangelism, but you've got others that obviously on the more extreme fringes that believe September 11th was an appropriate thing to do. All right. So certainly it is possible that religious beliefs can lead to evil. That does not necessarily mean there's a necessary connection to that, like he seems to be saying. He's just ignoring a lot of the evidence. All right. Let's see. Now we get to the fun one. All right. This is a favorite approach to meme making that a lot of people do. And we are on page 95, 96 of the book here. All right. And what you do is, and this is how a lot of memes are made, okay? You start out with a base picture. In this case, you have this picture of comedian Kevin Hart with this very entertaining look on his face, okay? And then what you want to do, he's looking shocked, right? He's looking surprised. And so someone will create a meme by typing words over this picture that is something that they claim is so shocking and surprising, right? And so this particular meme that I found on Pinterest, and I saw it's been in multiple places. It's made its rounds, all right? It says, that's Kevin Hart saying, when you find out Satan ain't the one creating evil. And then it quotes from Isaiah 45:7. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. All right. This is a deep one to see how much you remember about what we've covered in this class. All right. So first of all, just first impressions before I move on to the questions. What do you see here? Do you see any problems with what this fake, we'll call him faux Kevin, because Kevin Hart did not actually say this, okay? This is a meme somebody created, so we'll call him faux Kevin. Any problems with, don't write nasty letters to Kevin Hart, okay? This is not him. Any problem with what is being said here?
They took it out.
They did take it out of context. You're starting to, because remember, we talked about this exact passage. All right, and you're right, it is taken out of context. Before we can focus on the passage for a second, anybody see any problems with that statement at the top?
Well, Satan can't.
Thank you. Does Christianity say Satan created evil? I mean, we'll get into the whole, evil as a privation thing in a minute, but even if you didn't even know that, does anything in the Bible ever say Satan created evil? No, it's another straw man, isn't it? This is so common, especially on the internet. the vast majority of memes you will see about Christianity on the internet are straw men. They will say that Christians believe X, and Christians don't believe X, all right? But it's a lot easier to tear down Christianity if you try to tear down the false version than if you try to tear down the true version. So there's a problem with that one right off the bat, right? That's not even what Christianity teaches. And that's kind of what we're talking about here in question number 1. If not Satan, who does this meme implied created evil? Well, let's look back at the meme for a second. So he's saying that you find out Satan ain't the one creating evil. Well, who is it saying did create evil? God, right? That's the implication that this meme is making, all right? Is that consistent with what was discussed in chapter 2? Did God create evil? God was all good. We just talked about that. According to what Christians teach, everything that God made was good. God did not create evil, all right? Excuse me. Is evil even a thing that was created? No. Remember, we talked about that whole philosophical argument about evil as a privation of the good, all right, and how that holds up with Scripture, all right? So most Christians won't even tell you that evil isn't even a thing. It's a privation. It's an absence. It's like we have all this light in the room. If I turn off the lights, it will get dark in this room. But darkness is just the absence of light. You don't have dark waves. You have light waves, all right? When you don't have light waves, you have darkness, okay? Same kind of thing with good and evil. So there's all sorts of incorrect assumptions that are being made there to begin with. And here's the one where I was curious if you remembered, and you started to hit on it there for a minute. Does Isaiah 45:7 really say that God created moral evil? All right? Did he say it in the meme? He does not. You notice one little piece of information they left off of there. Which translation they used. Do you remember talking about that? Which one was it? This is the King James. Does any other translation translate this verse this way? No, that's deceptive. I'm sorry, that's just flat out deceptive. When you have to pick and choose your evidence, when the overwhelming number of scholars, obviously, and modern scholars, obviously disagree with that translation, but you still choose that particular one and not any other because that suits your argument, and you don't tell anybody else about, oh, by the way, every single other translation out there disagrees with my argument and doesn't say this. I'm sorry, that's dishonest. That's dishonest. Disaster, right. Because remember, we talked about that word that's translated evil does not necessarily refer to moral evil. It can refer to just disasters. And the context here, the surrounding context, what is God describing? God is describing how he's going to use Cyrus as his agent to punish Israel for Israel not living up to its end of the bargain, right, in the Sinaitic covenant. So if this really is supposed to be referring to moral evil, then that ends up with God calling his own judgments evil. Do you really think in context that's what God is doing? God is not saying, I'm evil, everybody. No. All right? He's saying he brings disaster. He brings calamity as punishment, which, by the way, is the exact same punishment the Jewish people agreed to when they entered into the covenant to begin with, all right? So this translation makes no sense in the context, but it's picking and choosing your evidence to try to make it seem. So it's dishonest in that regard as well. And then we get back to the back. The meme claims the alternative is that Satan created evil. In other words, if God didn't do it, then Satan must have done it. Is this what's taught by Christianity? We already talked about, no, evil's not even a thing that was created. And like you said, Barb, I think it was you, Barb, that said, Satan doesn't create anything, right? Satan is a deceiver. He's not a creator, all right? Doesn't mean we don't take him seriously, but it also means we don't elevate him and fear him for things that he is not, all right? All right, just checking in one more time here. All right, where are we at? Now, that was I've lost track of where we're at. I'm just going here. That was number 5. 97. Example 6, look at us flying through these things. We are going to touch on the conclusion here too, so don't think we're last one, we're almost done. We are almost done, but not quite that almost done. All right, so this is a statement by a gentleman by the name of Matt Chandler. In the book, I tell you a little bit about what happened with Mr. Chandler. He was, on Thanksgiving morning 2009, at that time, he was the lead pastor of teaching at the Village Church in Flower Mound, Texas, and he had a seizure on Thanksgiving morning. His family's getting ready for Thanksgiving dinner. He falls down with a seizure. He gets taken to the emergency room, finds out he has brain cancer, all right? Imagine that. You're getting together for this lovely holiday with your family, and you find out you have brain cancer. Now, he was, at one point he's describing, looking back on it, he's describing what his reaction was at the time when he first got the diagnosis. And this is what he said. He said, I don't believe in the end that God gave me cancer, but he certainly could have stopped it and didn't. All right? So, the first all-important question, where do you think Chandler's statement comes from? It's a gut reaction? Human fear? Yeah. How does your answer to that first question then about where it's coming from and why he's posing this question, how does that influence or dictate, I say here, the kind of answer you're going to give to Mr. Chandler if he were to say something like this to you? Compassionate? What other things might you say to him? We don't know why God did it? Are you going to start pulling out your Theodicies? Please don't. Please don't. Are you going to break down the arguments by premises and all this? No, don't do that.
Well, just finding out, and you don't know if it's going to be something that's curable or not curable, so you're giving him hope.
You don't know if it's going to be curable or not curable. You're trying to give him hope. And there's always hope, isn't there, whether it's curable or not? Because this is what I talk about lots of times. We as Christians have an eternal perspective. We realize that this life is not all there is. And so there's always hope. Even if the hope isn't in this life, we know there's hope in the next. This all gets back, and this is why I saved the best for last, to see how much your memory was really working here. This is going all the way back to week 1. And there's a reason why I started the book with it and why I ended the book with it. Because if you learn nothing else in this class, this is the most important lesson you can learn, which is listen to why they're asking the question. If it's coming from the head, that's one thing. If it's coming from the heart, that's something completely different. And you have to answer that question first before you know what your next step is. Because you're going to do more harm than good if you got somebody who's really having a personal existential struggle and you start rattling off about the free will theodicy and everything. They don't want to hear it. I mean, the last thing they want to hear is about the soul-making theodicy. Somebody just received a diagnosis of brain cancer. Do you really think they want to hear them? You tell them, don't worry, God's going to use it for something to make you stronger. Bye. Right? Not the right time. All right? Now, what's interesting is Mr. Chandler did not lose his faith. And on page 98 of the book, I have the rest of his quote. I don't have it on the screen. I admittedly picked and chose just one particular part to illustrate my point, but I want you to hear the rest of what he said. All right? So remember, he started out saying God could have taken away the cancer, but he didn't. All right? And he goes on to say this. So I have to believe, like Joseph, John the Baptist, and Paul had to believe when they were in prison, that God is working, and what the enemy means for evil, he will turn to good. There have been multiple occasions when God has used this tremendously. The Associated Press let me preach the gospel in an article that ran worldwide. The story has caught the imagination of the media here in Dallas, and we've been able to talk about the atoning work of Christ on TV as well as in newspaper articles. That has led to a ton of men and women surrendering their lives to Christ after wanting to talk with me through their own sufferings. If my life gets cut short, but we get to see new births in the kingdom, then I don't feel slighted or robbed in the least. Now, is that a realization that he came to in the moment when he was first diagnosed? No. That's a realization he came to after the fact, looking back on it, right? And something, I'm sorry? And praying, right. He doesn't, and I want to make sure I understand that Mr. Chandler received the benefit of this case of God showing him and giving some insight into how he was using that, all right? God may not do that, all right? So you can't necessarily go in and tell everybody to expect this. Most of the time, I would say we don't. We don't necessarily see how God can use something for another good, for a greater good. Remember, generally, like we talked about, Mr. Chandler had the benefit of seeing that. I'll tell you that I went through something only very tangentially similar. I certainly don't want to compare myself in any way, shape, or form to what happened here, but just showing you how God sometimes gives you little insights. There was a time, it's probably like 15 years ago now, where I was writing an apologetics blog on the internet, and I was contributing to something called the Christian Apologetics Alliance and their stuff, and I had my own little blog too. And I got to the point where I just wasn't getting a lot of followers, wasn't getting a lot of comments or anything. I said, you know what? Nobody's reading my stuff. Why do I bother doing this? This whole apologetic thing, okay, it'll be good for edifying myself, but I think I'm done with, trying to go out there and share it to the world because nobody cares what I have to say. Right after I said that, I got an email in my inbox from somebody on the other side of the world who was thanking me for some blog post that I wrote that they just saw. We're talking within hours of me saying that to myself. And I realized that, you know what, this whole time, God wasn't showing me that. It doesn't mean it wasn't happening. It doesn't mean it wasn't being used by him. And so this is a way that God can work. Sometimes he'll show us these results. Other times he won't. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening, and doesn't mean you should allow yourself to get discouraged by it. Mr. Chandler was able to see that. All right, and so that was a blessing. All right, so hopefully that helps you kind of break down and see the way you look at these things as they come up. And I will tell you, the first thing you should always look for is, are they assuming objective morality? I mean, you saw that's a recurring theme. It's always there. It's always there if it's a head objection. If it's a heart objection, no. But if it's a head objection, it's always there. All right? So you should always start looking for that, and then you can start looking for some of the other things. Now, what I want to talk about here at the very end, and we're just going to talk about the conclusions. Now let's kind of give a sum up of how to approach this, all right? How to approach this. I'm sending you out into the world, all right? What do you do? What's your strategy step by step, all right? The first thing, have I hammered this home enough yet? The very first thing you always have to do, discern the place from which the question is coming. Is it coming from the head or is it coming from the heart? You have to know that before you say anything, all right? Number two, the next step in your evaluation, remember what evil is. Evil is not something God created. It's certainly not something Satan created. It's the absence of good, kind of like darkness is the absence of light, all right? A lot of objections are based on a misunderstanding of the nature of evil or a misunderstanding of what the Bible teaches about it, all right? We saw that in the Kevin Hart meme, right? Number three, you need to properly frame the question, all right? Especially if you're speaking to someone who's already a believer. If someone who's already a believer in God realizes that this whole idea of good and evil only makes sense if God is in the picture, that can help take the sting out of some of our experiences, our negative experiences that we go through in life. I know it's worked for me. It's anecdotal. I'm not going to speak to everybody else. But the fact of the matter is once you realize that, yeah, I'm going through something. I think it's wrong. I think it's horrible. I think it's evil. But that can never cause me to lose my faith in God, because even though my heart is suffering, my head keeps telling me, but you calling that evil only makes sense if God is in the picture in the first place. And so that reframes the question. Now when I'm asking about this evil thing, this suffering, this horrible thing that's happening to me, I'm no longer asking, is God there? Instead, I'm asking, why would God allow this? Why is God allowing this? So my question now reframes from, is God even out there, to assuming, yeah, I know God's there, okay? But why would he be allowing this to happen? And sometimes, Job, God ain't gonna tell you, okay? But as long as you know that he's there, you can live with that.
The other thing to think about in that regard is God with me through this?
Yeah, the footprints, is God with me through this, the footprints poem. Mr. Gass is trying to mess me up. I'm live on the air, man. I got a class here. How are you doing, sir? You guys done? All right. Have a...
No, I'm really not. Sorry. Yeah, okay. I'm not gonna lie. Bless evening, everybody. Merry Christmas.
Good night, sir. All right. That's okay. I do the same thing to him, but the roles were reversed. I'm sorry. Were you saying, is that more do you want to add?
Is God with me through this? In other words, you've got what you've got. You've got the pain you've got. Is God with you through this? And if you don't feel it is, then let's you and I get on our knees and pray and ask God to come into your life in a more meaningful way so that you have the confidence that no matter what happens, God's on your side and will be with you.
Yeah, is God with me through this is a struggle that a lot of people face. And sometimes all you can do is, you're right, you get down with them, you pray with them so they can get to that point where they recognize that God's with them. And this is also, remember, one of the things I talked about, and again, I'm just giving you anecdotal stories about what worked for me. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. But this knowledge stuff is kind of like a vaccination. I know, bad sore subject nowadays, but it's kind of like a vaccination in the sense that I learned this stuff ahead of time so that when I'm going through the suffering, I'm protected from my emotions carrying me too far away from God, okay? Whereas if I don't look at this stuff ahead of time and I get into that suffering moment, it's gonna be an awful lot harder when I'm going through that suffering to see all these philosophical arguments and everything. You're not gonna wanna see that, all right? And so it's an awful lot harder to get to that point. If I haven't already in advance come to the realization that it literally makes no sense to say there's no God because of evil, all right? If I haven't come to that realization ahead of time, then I'm more likely to be tempted to go there when I'm going through a moment of suffering. But if I've already kind of committed to that and realized that in my mind beforehand, then when I get to that suffering stage in my life, it's like my mind keeps wanting to go down this path, or my heart, I should say, wants to keep going down this path, and my mind keeps kind of blocking it and getting in the way, saying, nope, you're not going any further. You can't go past that point because your mind won't let you, because you've already realized, no, it literally makes no sense. I can't go down that path. The fourth thing, so we're talking about, this is kind of the way your brain works, the process, the steps you're going through when you're analyzing these things. Discern the place from where the question is coming, remember what evil is, properly frame the question, and then number 4, if a philosophical discussion gets going, so it's not a heart issue, now we're talking about a head issue, okay? Listen carefully to determine if you're being presented with a logical or an evidential argument. Remember, we talked about the difference. A logical argument is someone who says it is literally logically impossible for God and evil to exist. If that's the case, you just need to show a 0.001% chance that they could, and you've defeated the argument. Very few people do that nowadays. You're not likely to see that. More often, you're going to see an evidential argument, which is just, I understand it's theoretically possible. I just don't think it's likely. All right. So, but you have to listen, because you have to know what kind of argument you're being presented with so that you can respond with the appropriate defense or theodicy or what we talked about in this last chapter.
We're that today with scientifically oriented people who deny the beginning of Genesis and say, no, it was a big bang, and everything evolved from there.
Well, yeah, a lot of people, scientific people nowadays will say everything, they deny the book of Genesis, they will say that it started with a big bang and everything evolved from there. I don't know, this is a quote from someone else, maybe a little bit snarky, but Randy was just here and he's the king of snark, so he would appreciate this. You know, you say there was a big bang, okay, well, a big bang requires a big banger. Who did the banging? You know?
The stuff that went bang come from.
You were the stuff that get banged. Well, that's the thing. Even the Big Bang Theory seems to suggest creation of something out of nothing, which Genesis 1:1, hi, you know. So you can even use a lot of that to get back to those same philosophical assumptions. There's a reason why people like the late Stephen Hawking spent a lot of his later years trying to avoid the implications of the Big Bang, because even he saw, though, wait a minute, if everything's this big now, and then we go back in time, and the universe is expanding, right? It's expanding. Well, you take that back in time, what do you get? It shrinks until it comes together at a singularity, all right? Even Stephen Hawking and a lot of other people realize, gee, that looks a lot like what Christians have been saying all along, all right? Well, I don't like that, so he tried to do some mathematical formulas and stuff to kind of, if you picture this as kind of an inverted cone, is the way a lot of people picture it, so it comes together at a point. He tried to kind of round off the bottom of that using like imaginary numbers. I'm not going to go in there. His theory was never accepted for good reason. That's a different class. We're not going to go there. And besides, if I start talking about imaginary numbers, we're going to be here for another hour as my mathematician wife gets up here and starts teaching the rest of the class. So we're not going to go there. A square root of negative number, yes. All right, and so that's kind of your strategy, but the most importantly, most significantly, look at the very bottom. Do all of this with gentleness and respect, right? 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. You can be right, you can have the right answers, but if you have the wrong method, you're not doing anybody any good. As a matter of fact, you're probably doing harm, because people, always pray beforehand, because people are not, if you're a jerk, people aren't going to listen to you, right? They're not going to listen to you. Now, this is a very quick overview. I could take this number 5 and just put the entire book I recommended at the beginning of the class, Tactics by Greg Kokel, and put it under there in number 5. There's a whole lot more about methodology that he talks about. Just for example, one of the things he talks about in there is when you're having conversations with people, it's much more effective if you ask questions than if you make statements. If someone, for a couple reasons, first of all, if somebody says, I believe X, and you just go off, let me tell you why you're wrong, all right? I mean, nobody wants to be preached at, and all you're doing is you're setting up a conflict, right? Whereas, as opposed to say, really, how'd you come to that conclusion? Well, what makes you think that? Now, all of a sudden, what's happening is they don't realize it, but you're actually controlling the conversation, all right? And you use questions to kind of point out the flaws in their reasoning so that they come to the realizations themselves, and that's much more effective.
The other thing about questions is that you don't ask closed questions, like you feel bad, don't you?
Yeah.
Open-ended questions, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And then when they say something, well, explain a little bit more about that.
Open-ended questions, yeah. I mean, and one of the number one questions he always asks is, well, how did you come to that conclusion? That's one of the examples that Greg Kokel gives. And the reason he says you ask that question, they got news for you. The overwhelming majority of the people don't have an answer to that question. How did they come to believe something? Because they saw a Kevin Hart meme on the internet. That's how they came to believe something, all right? Not because they thought it through, not because they're prepared to talk to you about it. Some people will be, but the vast majority of the people don't know how they came to believe something. They believe it because they want to believe it. And because their peer group or people they respect, people they like, they believe something, so they want to fit in, so they believe it. But they have never thought through and never tried to defend it whatsoever. All right? So, only one thing's left, and that is not that. See, that would have been worked great. The timing was right. There we go, but I have my being the wrong thing. All right. Thank you very much. I want to, first of all, understand that you all online have done me an immense favor. If you're joining us, and this is your first class joining us, this is part of my capstone project for my master's degree from Luther Rice Seminary. I am very happy to say that 1 week from Sunday, for A or for F, it'll be done, okay? I've still got work to do over this next week. This was the last class for that. And so you all have allowed me the opportunity to complete this project. And to give you another idea about how valuable you all have been, I've been editing the book as we go along based upon what happens in this class. I will tell you right now, I'm not quite done. I'm still editing the last chapter, the one we were going through tonight. But even as of right now, the book is currently about 25 pages longer than it is in your edition. All right, almost all of that is based on conversations that we've had here, questions that you all have raised or you online have raised that I realized, oh, that's a good question. I should talk about that. Or even the blank stares. Because sometimes I put something in the book, I wasn't referring to you. You look at me like, I put something in the book and I taught it one way and I'm sitting up here and I'm teaching it and it's like, crickets chirping. Yeah, that's not working, all right? And so, you think on your feet and you come up with some other example and, oh, that worked. Okay, let's go back and change that in the book and use whatever worked. And so, more than anything, you guys have done me a great favor. And so I want to thank you very much. And unless there's any other questions, you now understand evil from a Christian perspective.
In talking to someone who, let's just say, is talking about either the fires that have devastated things or the terrible storms that we've had,
Mm-hmm.
at some point, would it be incorrect to say, well, the fires, storms, and all of those things are things that have happened because of, could be partly because of the way we've treated the earth?
The question for those of you online is that if you look at things, for example, the example that Barb's giving is like all the fires that have been happening that cause mass amounts of devastation. We see this, it seems, every year. At some point, would it be appropriate to say that these things are happening because of the way we have treated the earth. And I would say that as long as you can, scientifically or whatever, make that connection, and it's a valid connection to make, the answer is that absolutely yes. Because you understand that the creation, we don't remember that we talked about Hinduism and how they, and there's all these beliefs about God being one part and parcel of the word creation, all that, and we don't believe that. But what we do believe is everything around us belongs to God. And he's given it to us as stewards, not as owners. We don't own this world, all right? God does. But he's put us in charge of taking care of it. Now, part of that stewardship, God does give us permission to use what resources he's put on here for our benefit within reason. It's to use, not to abuse. And so you always have to kind of keep in mind, if someone were to loan you, let's say that you wanted to, your computer broke down, all right, and you needed to borrow a computer in order to get some work assignment done, all right? Now, you could, reasonably, somebody loans you the computer. It's perfectly reasonable of you to take that computer, to turn it on, to type things up, to print things out, to use the computer, all right? It is not reasonable for you to take that computer and throw it in the kitchen sink and pour water all over it, okay? Just even if you think it might make a great YouTube video, all right? That's not, or TikTok, that's more of a TikTok thing. That's not an appropriate use as a steward of that property that was given to you. It's the same thing with creation. God made it. We're allowed to use it, but we're not allowed to abuse it. We're not allowed to use it in ways that are antithetical to what he wants done with his creation. So yeah, under those circumstances, I think it would be reasonable. Anything else?
I just want to thank you.
I thank you. You did me the favor. So, all right, everybody. For those of you that are still here, we've got a couple comments. Gene Brown also says thank you, and he gets so much out of my classes. Thank you, Gene, for participating. And I don't know if this is I don't know what's going on. It looks like we have Donna Matthews and Allison Garrison also saying something that looks a little bit funky, but might be Virginia Tech reference, similar to what Ann Paris did before, so I'm not sure what that is in reference to. But thank you all. For those of you that are still here, please eat the food. And for those of you that are home, if you didn't have food, go to your fridge and get some, all right? Thank you all. God bless.
Remember who got this degree for you?